The Talking Points with the Training Center starts now.
Hello, thank you for joining Talking Points with the Training Center. I'm Dan Kabuling, owner of IDT Training and Director of Strength and Conditioning here. Today is a special day as we have an amazing crew of strength and conditioning coaches to speak on player development. Typically on this podcast, we have coaches, and me as the S&C guy, I've been kind of biting to get more strength and conditioning guys on here just because I do think it's a really important piece of player development. And I think that it's an area that there is a lot of confusion as far as what players should be focusing on, what they should be doing. So I think you guys are a great start of, professionals who are in the field working with athletes, specifically our baseball and softball players, our rotational and overhead athletes. So let's start with our intros.
So my name is Cody Neidenbach, owner of AIM Sports Performance in a suburb of Chicago. I work with some basketball players, but a ton of overhead athletes, including softball, baseball, and some swimmers. Just kind of train pretty much everybody. But like I said, primarily some overhead athletes.
Yeah, so my name is Joe Schiess. I am the Director of Sports Performance at GTS Performance and Fitness in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. So we're in southeastern Wisconsin. I primarily train softball and baseball athletes. So my bosses both have their own travel softball and baseball teams. So I basically am the director of their training as well. So we probably have close to 200 athletes in our teams, but we only train our 12U and up. So when they sign up to play, they get a whole year of training, and I basically oversee all of that. And then on the side, in the same gym, I train football, soccer, wrestling, you name it. So, but primarily, baseball and softball.
So I'm Bill Miller. You can find me on Instagram at Bill Miller Training. I primarily train baseball and javelin throwers, and I'm training out of a facility called Dream Big Athletics and just west of Chicago. And for the most part, I just really focus on power development. That's my main thing. I'm big on making sure guys gain as much throwing velocity and exit velocity as possible with the training I do.
Well, I'm Brandon Firstel, and I am the Director of Performance out of a private training facility out of Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, just out of Madison. I primarily work with athletes 8 to 18 years old. We end up having pretty much athletes out of any different sport. A lot of the high school sports that you'll end up seeing pretty much wherever you're at. We end up training them. We also end up training the local JV varsity hockey teams here, the men's swimming team. And then we're also starting to get into a little bit more of working with football and soccer within some of our specific teams. The past year and a half, I've had my TPI certification, Titleist Performance Institute. And so the last year and a half, I've been really specializing in training with golfers primarily.
So as I said, we definitely have some commonalities, but I think that there's definitely a diverse experience of level of athlete and then even just kind of location. So the first talking point that I want to dive into and break down is where do we think, strength and conditioning, the weight room, where do we rank that as far as player development? The question or the answer to a lot of these things, I think it depends on the athlete. But I think the population that we work with the most is probably that like 7th, 8th, high school aged athlete. So I'm going to have Cody start with this. Where do you put like strength and conditioning as far as player development goes?
So you and I have talked about this a little bit. I think theoretically it should depend on the athlete themselves. Okay, is this athlete very skilled at their sport? And kind of what can we do from a training standpoint to help improve that skill? But realistically, at most players, from a development standpoint, training is kind of a secondary tool, I guess you would say. That's kind of their secondary concern. They just want to, whether it's a baseball player, softball, basketball, whatever it is, they want to play their sport. They want to work on their craft more than I would say strength training.
That makes sense. Is Bill, is that your experience with the athletes you work with?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of right in the same boat. But the one thing I will say is, like, I personally have never had like that that super skilled kid that's like kind of a genetic freak that's really good at baseball. Like I've never had that kid that's just born to throw 95 miles per hour enter my facility. So it's kind of like S&C plays a crucial role because we know that it's going to get them to the point where their body can produce 90 or 95 miles per hour. Obviously, they need to get the thousands upon thousands of reps with that specific skill of throwing or swinging in order to get to that next level. But if their body doesn't change, if they can't produce more force at this time next year, then they're probably going to stagnate in their training. So that's kind of where S&C plays a role. It might not be the most important thing on the forefront of the kid's mind, but for their long-term development, in my opinion, it's a must, because if you don't have a good S&C plan and you're super skilled, you're probably either going to get hurt or you're going to stagnate in your performance.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Brandon, what about you? Does that kind of like echo that, or anything you'd add?
Yep, definitely. I mean, I think us as a S&C profession, what we mainly do is we help teach the movements and the patterns that eventually help build a skill. So like in my facility, I'm not teaching someone how to hit a baseball, how to throw better, but we're building that engine up a little bit bigger so that, just like Bill was saying, so they have the potential to be able to throw 90 plus miles an hour, or so they have the potential to jump 30 plus inches when they're playing a basketball game. A big thing within golf too, and again, working with like a little bit more like of the older population. And I have a golf pro that I work with here in Wisconsin that I'm partnered with, that we end up having clients that I'll send some to him, he'll send some to me. After going through an assessment and everything, once we find out where some people have like limitations, if he's trying to teach a specific thing within their swing or try to correct something, but they physically can't do it, and from my assessment, we end up seeing like, yeah, you don't have the T-spine rotation mobility, then that's where like we really come in and we can help with these things. Aside from their specific skill, we can help them move a little bit better, whether it's just be able to improve their like mechanics, or if they're dealing with pain or something like that, then ideally helping going through some of our training programs can just put them in a better position that they're going to be able to do their skill a lot better than they normally could.
I like that analogy of, putting power in, horsepower and improving the engine. Joe, you have kind of a captive audience with your background, or with your setup, where you have the players, they come in, they, like Cody's saying, I want to go to my batting practice. I have practice, right? But part of that development is the strength and conditioning side of things. So how do you bridge that gap, and then how do you kind of shift the focus?
Yeah. So right now, basically we, like Brandon said, I don't really do anything with the hitting or the throwing. I never played baseball, so I can't really get too in depth with that kind of stuff. I'm obviously building towards that, but we kind of do the same thing where if we're doing lessons and a kid's struggling with a position, okay, what do we see now? What can we see in there? We'll pull them to the side and do a one-on-one assessment with them, because again, with so many athletes, we can't do that individualized one-on-one assessment. I'd be spending all day doing that, but we kind of do the same thing. And to kind of go off the original question, in my opinion, obviously I'm biased because I love lifting weights, but I really do think it's a big priority for the athlete, even though they might not see it that way, because my biggest thing for the kids is to mitigate injury, especially being in my setting. I need to make sure these kids are able to play as long as they can, as hard as they can, to the best of their ability. So if I have a kid that's, sitting on the bench, we can't have that. So I think it's incredibly important, obviously, with that. I mean, it's pretty obvious that we're trying to mitigate injury. But again, like Brandon said, we're working on those movement patterns to improve those skills. And the way I see it is different things become more important throughout their career. So again, I might see an athlete, I've had an athlete with me for 4 years now in our club program. So I get to kind of work with them from before puberty, through puberty, and after puberty. And that focus becomes different, obviously, as they get older. Okay. So we're working on the movement capabilities and capacity at the beginning when they first come in, making sure they can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. And eventually as they get older, like Bill says, we're working on that force development. And how can we improve that every time we reassess and, obviously peak during the season. So again, I see it as obviously a big priority. And I think again, the tides are turning with the amount of baseball and softball kids that are seeing the importance of it, which is huge. You know, they're not afraid to get after it. Again, we still run into kids that do kind of shy away with it, and again, that's the other important side of it, is where we need to bridge the gap between what are we doing and why is it going to help you. You know, the kid doesn't always understand why, you know, whatever it be, a back squat, they're like, well, why we got to do this, or how is this going to transfer to me hitting harder, throwing harder? Again, that's a big part of it, but yeah, huge part, I think.
Totally. And I think that I think we're all on the same on the same page as far as like the strength and conditioning side is important, but context. So depending on the athlete, we're going to adjust and cater and try and individualize to where they're at with their development. So, which leads us perfectly into our next question. I want to know, like, the next talking point is like, where do you start with an athlete? And I think everybody kind of alluded to this. We talked about assessments or individualization, but Bill, when you have a brand new athlete walk into the building, where do you start? What's your process?
Definitely like the basic FMS screen is a really good place to start. And just looking at how well they can move and things like a jump and a landing position. How well did they move through a warm up? Just watching what their ankle stability looks like when you ask them to run a sprint for you, even at 80%. Those sorts of things are really, really important. But beyond that movement screening, especially with like the older guys, like the older high school guys and the college guys that have been weight training for a while, the thing that I like to go to is the force velocity profile and see what they produce force like against a heavier load, a medium load, and a lighter load. And that can really show you a lot of information about where the program should go. Should this guy be doing more of that speed work, the plyometrics? Should they be doing more VBT type work in the weight room? Or is this kid really force deficient and they need to do more of that maximal effort strength training? To me, that's your compass right there. It makes programming a lot easier for me, at least.
And I think the another really valuable part is you can't really cheat that assessment. Like, there's certain movement screens and there's certain tests that we can use where we might get a false positive or false negative and be like, okay, well, you know, move on to the next. But that protocol that you and I have talked about, there's no cheat in that. It's, you know, get after it, see what you can do, and then you can program from there. Joe, what about you? Where do you start? This is something we have talked, you and I have had a couple of Zooms on our own time, trying to dive into assessments and dive into some of this individualization piece. When you have a brand new athlete, where do you start with them?
Basically, I could come at this from two different perspectives, and one perspective being that somebody signs up to train with us one-on-one, well, not one-on-one, but semi-private, separate from our baseball, softball, or the perspective of we assess our team as a whole. And I kind of, even though I think we had a good talk, I kind of want to go into that more because I think it's different from everybody else, if that's okay. Yeah, so what we do, we assess our kids 12U and up, basically maybe 4 times a year. We'll do everything from broad jump, vertical, exit velocity, throwing velocity, stuff like that. But my big thing is, especially with the younger kids, looking at how they move, like Bill said, watching them warm up, just watching them during the assessment. I can go, okay, this kid's going to need a lot of work and a lot of my focus is going to be just making sure he moves right. These kids are going to be, you know, more advanced. So for instance, let's take our 13U team. We have some kids that are just genetic freaks, and everything I tell them they're able to do, they can do it well. And then there's the kids who are still like, you know, prepubescent that again, can't walk. So I'm looking more at that. And I'm kind of developing a program from there. And again, it's just like a college setting, right? Where I have to program the team as a whole and we go different phases. So I really can't get into the one-on-one assessment with these kids, like I said, because we have so many. But again, that is a goal going forward, especially with our higher level, or I shouldn't say higher level, just our older kids, you know, because that's when they need those little details to get that extra 1% in their hitting or their throwing. Kind of like Brandon said, take them to the side and assess them. But right now we don't do anything like that just because we don't have the manpower. But eventually I'll have my own assistant, so we'll be able to do that. But going back to a kid that comes in by himself, I like to look at their static jump versus their counter movement jump. Their acceleration, like a 10-yard acceleration sprint based compared to a 10-yard fly. And these are more for the older kids, just to kind of see, are they more of a strength dominant athlete or a more plyometric dominant athlete? And I kind of program around that. But again, you can't really get into the individualized stuff, unfortunately, with our teams right now. So,
which is completely understandable.
Yeah.
I've made the mistake of going to my alma mater and saying, "Hey, I can assess the entire baseball team and walk through 60 assessments," and I'd never been so brain dead in my life. So I can appreciate that. Brandon, what about you? Brand new athlete walks in the building. Where do you start?
Yeah, so I mean, aside from getting just an initial questionnaire, getting goals, training history, injury history, stuff like that for background, once we end up bringing them in, we run them through kind of our own little assessment that we've made. We took stuff from like FMS, the TPI screen, and then just typical things that we want to end up seeing as far as like how can you shuffle and change direction, or how can you do a lateral plant, change of direction, like different things like that. A lot of the things I think within our assessment, like I always want to have everything be like, okay, we're testing this because of this. A lot of things help either me like program a little bit better as far as like, okay, you can nail an overhead squat, just a body weight one, but you can nail an overhead squat. So most likely you're going to be ready for things that are a little bit more past like our squat ISOs. So it's like, we'll probably start with a goblet squat anyways. And so a lot of the things kind of help me program a little bit more as far as understanding which progression is proper for each individual. Yeah, we do some different things as far as like joint range of motion and things like that. But a lot of times those are more of just trying to get like a baseline measurement. So we can end up seeing like, are the things we're doing actually improving on what we're testing, or are we just kind of staying the same? Within our population, we used to assess everyone that came in through the door. So a lot of even our 8 to 11 year olds we would assess. After doing a lot of different assessments in them, kids just need to learn how to move at that age. And so it's just like, I don't care what your external rotation at your shoulder is when you're at that age. You just need to learn how to train. You need to learn how to move. And so recently, the past couple of months, our 14-year-olds and up, we're assessing them because they get more of like a specific program. But we've changed things up a little bit. And within a lot of our younger athletes, they're basically just thrown into kind of an overarching program where we work on all of our speed and agility, power, strength, conditioning, mobility. So it's basically hitting everything, but we're starting at like easier progressions for everyone, and everyone's kind of like moving together. I'll advance some people within the session if they're killing it, if their squat pattern's really good, and they're using a dumbbell that, like for me, if they can end up using a dumbbell that is like about half their body weight for about 10 reps, and we'll start moving up to like a barbell. And so a lot of things we have, you kind of have to like earn the progression. But yeah, with a lot of our older individuals, we just end up having them run through the movement assessment, and we'll end up doing, we used to do it once a month where we used to call it a skills day, where athletes would end up coming in. It's basically just like a combine, but it gives us a chance to be able to look more at some of their speed and their power qualities rather than like just their movement capabilities. And so a lot of times, like based off of like the testing for that, if they're not improving on their vertical jump or something that they want to improve on within that, then I'll start kind of gearing their program a little bit more towards that. Like, for example, we have like a push-up test in our skills day. I had one athlete that a year ago, he wanted to be able to get his name up on the record board, like very, very badly. And so for the next 7 months, we ended up really attacking that in his training program, and he ended up getting up on the record board after that. And so, yeah, biggest thing is just, if you're going to be assessing something, just make sure that you're using it for something and not just testing and then you're not using anything with that information.
Totally. I think that I can appreciate that as far as getting that information back to the athletes. So, Cody, what about you? Brand new athlete walks in the building. Where do you start?
Pretty similar to pretty much everybody else. I mean, I'll take them through an assessment. I'm getting much more brief with these assessments though, just because they're more for myself and just getting to meet the athletes anyway. So, I'll run them through like a mobility, a movement screen, and then currently I just do a vertical jump. If they're a basketball player or a volleyball player, I'll add an approach jump just to get baseline numbers. Then I'll also do a 10-meter sprint. All I'd use those for is kind of like Brandon said, is I just get baseline numbers because that's kind of what the kids care about. Is they, like, if they have a certain goal, they want to see feedback that what they're doing is translating to reach those goals, whether it's, sprint faster, jump higher, if it's a baseball player, rotational power, whether it's however you measure that with a med ball. But I mean, and then I'm really getting into kind of that first month, depending on what I see in the assessment, is I'll use that first month to see how they move, basically with new movements. So, if they didn't do very well with, like a walking lunge, okay, we'll start with a split squat, see how that goes, then kind of add either some sort of lunge variation. But I kind of use the first couple weeks of training as kind of like a lengthened assessment to just kind of see how they do, how the program is, if it's too easy, too difficult, and then I kind of just make adjustments from there.
Awesome. And it's one of those, I feel like it's the same, but it's not, where depending on the athlete that walks in the building, obviously all of our contexts are slightly different. So figuring out what works best for you and making sure that the athlete understands, like, here's why we're doing what we're doing. And here's proof that it's actually working. I think that thought process is pretty powerful. So I want you guys to all think about like one or two, like a myth, misconception, a outright lie, like what's something that you've heard from a parent or social or wherever, where it's like, man, that's just not true. So like for me personally, it really bugs me when a parent comes in and says, oh, my child's too young, they shouldn't work out, working out's not safe, lifting weights isn't safe, but then they go play 17 games on the weekend for the NJB team. Or they go and they go play baseball with their team, and then they switch over, like literally play a basketball game in the morning and then go play a baseball game in the afternoon. It's like the stress that you're putting your child through in sport is exponentially higher than anything that I'm going to do in the gym. So that's my little rant. But Brandon, what about you? Any kind of like a myth or like a misconception? Like, man, this really gets on my nerves. It's just not right.
I mean, I guess one thing I kind of see, and this is, within the facility I work in, like we have a small space, and then the club is huge that we're in. So I end up seeing a lot of what goes on in like the general population, like weight room areas. And I've been seeing a lot of like people that say like football players from the high school, like they train here, they just lift on their own. A lot of people, I think, they believe that this field and like strength training is only lifting weights. And a lot more like, I see people doing bodybuilding style workouts all the time. Like basically you're doing your squats for 20 plus reps and you're not able to stand up afterwards. And I think a lot of people don't know necessarily like all about what we end up doing as coaches and everything. And they just take one part of it and go all out with that. And so, the biggest thing too, is I see a lot of general population people, again, they want to be able to train for soreness. They want to train to get tired and stuff. And I always tell the kids, if you want to get better at things, if you want to get faster, you want to get more powerful, if you're doing those things when you're dead, you're laying on the ground, it's like, how do you expect to get faster and improve these qualities when everything you're doing training wise is just bearing you in the hole? So I think that's definitely a big one, is putting a little bit too much time into the weights. And then also just when you do end up doing that, they just train too hard to the point where they're just training for soreness and not much for results at all.
Yeah, I've put a couple of rants online about like, if you just care about being sore or sweaty or tired, and I think this is from our master's program, like go grab a 2x4, whack yourself over the head 10 times, and you'll get all those outcomes, but you're not going to get any better. Yep. Joe, I'm sure you're chomping at the bit. What do you got?
So I think the biggest thing I see is the one that bugs me the most, I think, especially dealing with power athletes the most. And I think I tweeted this a week or two ago, is doing like the long distance stuff to be in shape. And I think it's a parent thing too, because they don't, obviously as a parent or sometimes a coach, they don't understand energy systems, which, that's completely understandable. It's not their job to do that. But, I had a cross country kid who plays baseball for us. I'm like, what do you do cross country? He's like, oh, stay in shape for baseball. I'm like, I didn't say anything, but I'm thinking, I'm like, and that's why I tweeted. I'm like, we can, if he loves running, so be it. But if not, they're just doing to stay in shape. We need to reframe, what being in shape means for them. And obviously assist the parent in understanding that. And I think we all understand why, that might be detrimental to athletes who need to develop force in a quick amount of time. But that's my biggest pet peeve, I guess, is thinking that long distance running or those workouts that just completely kill you every time you walk in the gym doesn't really correlate with our performance.
That was the most tame I think that I've seen you, Joe. I like that. That shows me there.
Thank you.
Well, Bill, what about you? Any myths? Anything that you're like, man, we got to correct this. This got to change.
Yeah. So I would say something that maybe isn't the biggest myth that really ticks me off necessarily, but it's this idea that if you reverse lunge 2.5 times your body weight, you're going to throw 90 miles per hour. If you can press 1.5 times your body weight, you're going to throw 90 miles per hour. Like, I have nothing against Dr. Josh Heenan. He's a great guy. And I think his 90 mile per hour formula gets kids interested in weight training. And that's 2 thumbs up from my opinion. But you also see the negative consequences of it, where you get this college kid who's a junior in college who's been weight training for 5 years, trying to get that deadlift up, trying to get that reverse lunge up, and they're still throwing 82. So I think weight training is an outstanding tool that we can use to our disposal, but it's not a great way to assess that you are getting that high velocity force production, that rate of force development that might impact throwing. In my opinion, if you're going to measure for throwing velocity, measure throwing velocity. You can't just lift some weights and expect to throw harder. You know what I mean?
I like it. It's something I've been reframing everybody in here, where it's like you adding 5, 10, 15 pounds to your deadlift or lunge or whatever exercise you want. And you're already at 70, 80, 90% of your quote unquote physical capacity, like focusing that time and energy onto that, like, training economy. Like if we're focusing on that, but then we watch you swing or throw and it's like, oh man, like that's not going to play. That's not going to play at high school. And that's not going to play at the next level. So I've definitely been doing the same thing of like, hey, strength is a tool. It's one of your tools. And once you've maxed out and we focus on maintaining that tool, and strength is easy to maintain. That's the other part. I think a lot of players forget where they think like, I'm not going to be able to do that. I got to do it every single time. So what about you, Cody? Any myths, anything you want to break down?
I'm kind of with the rest of them. The people who come in, or the parents that say, I need my son or daughter to come in and just kick their butts today. But they're coming in the next day. It's like, okay, if I kick their butts today, we're probably not going to be able to accomplish anything tomorrow. Whether it's a muscle soreness, whether it's just overall fatigue, maybe they don't get any sleep that night. Whatever it is there's this perception, kind of like Brandon and Joe said, where the harder the workout, the more it's doing, which is, I really don't believe that's the case. It's kind of finding that sweet spot, where you and I have talked about this, like how little can we do to get the most adaptation? I have college guys that come in, or over the summer, they were coming in 4 days a week, 5 days a week. There's no way you can hold up a 8, 9, 10 intensity workout 4 or 5 days a week and not just feel the effects of it long term. So it's really trying to find that happy medium. And the big thing is explaining to the parents, like, there will be times where there are hard workouts, but sometimes they won't be as hard. It's all part of, everybody says it, it's all part of the process. Like, trust the process a little bit, trust that strength coaches kind of have an idea of what they're doing, and just kind of see what happens with that. But I guess that's kind of where we come in, is we have to convey that message to parents and athletes.
I think that's I'll finish this off with like the transactional nature of us being in the private industry, on top of us being all pretty young to this industry. So it's kind of like when a parent comes in, they have no clue who we are. Like, Bill, you probably have the biggest following, and then Joe right behind you, but the rest of us, like, nobody knows who we are. We don't have any credibility within an industry. And then we're also training their prized possession. You're training their child. and that prized possession is a representation of them. So our job, hopefully, as we move through this field and continue to gain that credibility, things will become a little less transactional, and we'll get a little less questioning on how and why we're doing what we're doing, because we start building this database of athletes of like, man, look at all these people who've gotten better training with us. So yeah, no, that was good. That was my own little personal point that I wanted to go into. So next talking point, and next two we'll probably kind of zoom by. Not the last one we probably will, but this next one I definitely want to dive into, because I know Bill, it's a big passion of yours. I've been reading through your book. I believe, Joe, you said you're reading through his book too. It's an awesome read. There's a ton of great information. I've been implementing some of the protocols and some of the like philosophies, I guess you could say, into the training, because I think one of the areas that we all try and to improve, no matter what athlete, is power output. So I want to read a quick quote that just stuck with me. And then Bill, if you want to kick this off as far as, okay, power testing, how do we do it? Why do we do it? How does it affect our training? But the quote I wanted to bring up is like, for baseball, softball, and golf, we find the athletes must rotate at very high speeds with light loads. So a rotational medicine ball throw test would fit very well. Conversely, an Olympic lifting derivative, though it may be a great training tool, is not a great testing tool. The planes of motions, loads, and speeds found are all very different from what we find when they are swinging and hitting a baseball as far as possible. So I like that mentality of we probably, again, when we're assessing and testing and training, like, things need to ebb and flow on that spectrum of specificity. So like, let's dive into your book, power testing. How do you go about it? Why? How does it affect your programming?
Right. Yeah. In my opinion, it's the one way that we can really ensure that our training program is pushing athletes in the right direction. That's what we need to make sure is happening. It's very easy to, like the guys have said many times so far in this podcast, get guys tired, get guys sore. That's not my goal. My goal is to get guys more powerful for their sport. Now, there's going to be many training methods that we do that will make them tired and sore. We will do heavy weight training for those guys, as I mentioned before. In their force velocity profile, they profile as more force deficient. We're going to do plenty of heavy weight training with them. But at the end of the month, when we retest them with that rotational medicine ball scoop toss, or that rotational medicine ball shot put throw, that velocity should be going up as a result of all the work that we've put in. So that's kind of the main idea here. And an argument that I get once in a while is, well, what's the point of measuring med ball velocity when we can just test their baseball specific velocity or their swing speed? And I agree with that. We should be measuring that specific test as well. But the med ball velo can tell you a lot about what that athlete's power is like, independent of their swinging velocity. So for example, if med ball velo has gone up 4 miles per hour in 2 months, that's great. But if their swinging velocity has not improved, then there's something specific to that swing that we then need to focus on. Something with their mechanics is going haywire. Something with their intent when swinging a baseball bat or a club is not improving. And that's what we need to focus on. Then. So it really helps you check boxes as well. And like, if medicine ball throws is something that we're going to program, why wouldn't we want to track it? You know what I mean? We want to have maximal intent. We want to have maximal effort to create that transfer to sport. So in my opinion, it's a no-brainer that you should be tracking med ball velo, but it does have pretty good correlation to that specific nature of rotational power development.
That makes sense. I guess what we're now flipping back to another thing that drives me nuts is like, hey, here's a med ball drill, and you're like, you watch a kid go through it, and it's not their fault. They have no context. They're just doing the drill, and it's like this is like the best part of training. You get to chuck something at a wall as hard as you can. Get after it. Like, let's break the wall. Let's break the ball. Let's do something with this. So setting up a radar gun or giving them some of that feedback, I think is awesome. And then one of the systems I'm really working on is trying to track and see the changes that are happening from those throws. So what about you, Cody? I know you're a big, we've talked a lot about speed development and vertical jump is something that you've seen progress with and improvement. And then how do you go about kind of assessing and testing that?
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. It's I mean, the feedback is kind of everything. You know, you and I have seen it where kids will try harder on maybe a vertical jump or they'll try harder on their sprints if there's feedback, if there's something to jump to, if there's a timer for their sprints. And in my opinion, the only way you're going to get more powerful or faster on a sprint or jump higher is by doing some of those things at max intent. So every time you do sprints, like unless it's specifically designed where it's a sub-max day, you have to go all out on that in order to really get improvements. And that I feel that kind of goes with any sort of power test. That's kind of me personal. But I mean, in terms of resources, the reason I do the vertical jump and the sprint stuff is because that's kind of what I have access to right now. Like I would love to get a radar gun and test med ball velocity, because it's fun. It's fun for everybody. It's fun to see improvements. It's fun to see kids really just try as hard as they can. But I mean, right now I just kind of keep it simple with jumps and sprints.
Sweet. Yeah, it is. I know you and I have talked about that, about kind of improving your toolbox as far as the things that you can test and track. Joe, what about you in the facility? Power testing. I know you talked about some jumping protocols.
Yep.
Speed. Where do you go?
So, and again, this is more with our kids who walk in the door and aren't part of our baseball softball team, but they play baseball softball. And again, like Cody said, it's what I have access to, right? So we'll do our vertical. I know I mentioned the static and the counter movement jump. Kids broke our jump mat, so all I have access to right now is a Vertec. So again, it's low hanging fruit. If I can improve that, at least we're taking steps in the right direction. We do have a radar gun. I just got to talk my boss into mounting it for the med ball wall, because obviously they're pretty pricey. But I guess I'm going to beat a dead horse here with the whole intent thing. Like, that makes such a big difference. A kid he's a baseball player. I think he's going to be senior. I was using a push band with him on deadlifts, and I was like, we're going a little heavier, obviously, but we want to move the weight with intent, right? So we're around 0.6, 0.5 meters per second. And I've never seen that kid lift that much weight in my life before. Like probably 70 pounds more than he's ever done. And I was like, it just puts it in context of how much that matters. So to beat a dead horse, there you go. But again, I'm just looking at the simple things, vertical, our sprint times. Is our acceleration bad? Okay, so then we need more strength work. Is our top end bad? Okay, we need more speed work or plyometric work. And again, with our baseball, softball teams, I'm just looking at their exit velocity, their throwing velocity, and that's a tough one. And that's something where I'm looking to integrate what Bill's been doing, because there's so many variables to why they might make a jump or why they might not make a jump. For the younger kids, if they get stronger, I mean, that's low hanging fruit, right? They're going to improve. Did they hit puberty? Okay, great. I don't want to discredit what I do, but I probably didn't have much to do with it if they, grew 5 inches and they put on 20 pounds just because they hit puberty, right? But with the older kids, that's where it's harder to look without the things that Bill's using. Is, okay, why didn't our exit velocity go up? Is it something I'm doing? Are the workouts not the right thing for them? Are they not sleeping enough? Is it not eating enough? So that's where, again, going back to what Bill's doing, I'm looking to integrate something like that, which is why I'm diving into the book, because I think it obviously can help us. But again, I'm just looking at simple things and doing what I can do to adjust everything I need to do to improve their numbers. So I hope that they transfer right now, but that's the goal.
Nice. Hopefully we can get Brandon's answer in before the next bell schedule. So go ahead, Brandon. Now I actually want you, because we haven't really touched on a ton, like from a golfing standpoint, do you do any power testing with your golfers? Is, driver distance, club head speed, anything like that?
Yeah. So I have a little tool. I can't remember exactly what it's called now, but it'll like roughly measure like your swing speed, ball speed, your carry, your distance, all that kind of stuff. I really only end up caring about ball speed and club head speed, because a lot of the other metrics I really can't do anything with anyways. So when I go through an assessment with some of my golf clients, I'll for sure end up having them go through a couple swings just to be able to see what their mechanics are looking like and to be able to get that number. But then also within TPI, TPI specifically ends up using vertical jump tests. They use a seated chest pass. They do a shot put toss off each side. And then they also do like a supine line overhead med ball throw. From those numbers, they have some normative data that you can compare like yourself to people in your age group and everything like that. People kind of know like, all right, my vertical jump is awesome, but all my upper body tests all with a med ball are lacking. And so there's different things like programming wise that helps like distinguish more of like, all right, we need to work in this area that's more general to what you do because it's going to help within the entire specific skill of swinging a golf club. I always kind of think too is like power training, power testing, it's highly vector specific. So within like a club head speed, if you have a fast swing speed, typically that's going to be correlated with having like a higher vertical jump, or they're going to have some type of relation within it. But that doesn't mean I'm going to train someone just for a vertical jump and expect it to be able to improve their rotational power. So a lot of the things that we do test, we try to have like a lot more of a global aspect with it. So within ESP, we took some of the TPI tests, but then we also have some of the typical ones as far as like we have our vertical jump, whether it's going to be a standing or an approach one, depending on your sport. We'll go through a broad jump to be able to test our horizontal power. Sometimes we'll end up going through, I'll have people do power skips for distance, and they'll do like 5 skips off each leg, and then we'll end up marking their distance. And so I don't have like a normative data to be able to compare that to, but we're kind of building our own base within like the populations that we have just from testing this pretty often. So I can kind of know like, all right, you definitely need to be able to work on your unilateral, like horizontal power. And that's good. It should end up having some type of correlation within our sprint speed. And then for some of our upper body ones, we do the shot put test, just be able to see some of our rotational power. And we don't have anything like the unit I have for measuring swing speed. I've tried to set it up to be able to measure med ball speed, but the area that it records is so small that it doesn't happen. So we measure our med ball distance instead.
And so, Bill, that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you. You had put in the book, obviously if you have a radar gun, do that, but the distance piece, how do you go about that? What do you see? Like, when you're doing the testing, I'm just imagining I've got like my 14-year-old and they're chucking the ball and it's like, hey dude, like you're supposed to throw it this way. We didn't want you to like, what are the different things like from a protocol standpoint that you can ensure that those distances are accurate?
Oh man, honestly, you got to give them a couple times to practice with it before you really use that as a main metric. If you don't have a radar gun, give them at least 2 times of like, all right, hey, we're going to go 3 sets of 5 rotational scoop toss and just chuck this thing as far as you can. They'll get the hang of it eventually, but it does take a while. So if your baseline tests are based off of that, like, initial tests when they've never done it before, your numbers are going to be crazy. They're going to be all over the number, all over the place. But I would say after they've gone probably 2 sessions where they've gone like 3 or 4 sets of 5 reps, they should start to get the hang of it. And then after that, of course, you have to throw out any outliers. You really, it's like if a kid throws mostly 35 feet with a med ball test and then they throw one that's like 22 because they threw it way off to the right, just throw it out. Don't even worry about that. So that's what I would say for the most part. You can honestly just use peak. If you're peak throwing distance, that's the best possible throw you could make with that ball, then you could probably just use peaks instead of averages.
Yeah, and then I think that for the athletes, they like to talk about what their peak numbers were, so that sticks in their brain a little bit better than the averages, because averages are a little meaner. But I think the last piece that I'll add to this, and the part that I appreciate the most about your book and the protocols that it provides, is it allows us to test something in a safe way. So like we can't test throwing velo year round. Like we shouldn't be doing that because there's certain times of the year that we shouldn't put that stress into the body or the arm or the back. I think for the hitters too, something we've been running into and trying to figure out better protocols is all that rotational torque. Like if the spine, the core, all the musculature in that area is not prepared for that stress, then if we hop in the cage right away, which we have had happen, unfortunately, is like I've been sitting on my butt for 5 months because of quarantine, and then I want to get in the cage and swing 20, 30, 500 swings the first day because I'm Johnny in the backyard and I need to get after it. That's a lot of stress. So we can mitigate injury. We can prepare and on-ramp the stress of that rotational aspect of throwing and hitting with med balls, and do it in a way that we're not going to get the maximal output because they're throwing something heavier than a bat and a ball. So I think that's also a really, really valuable piece. Name the game. Last question, last talking point. Name the game transfer. How do we make sure what we're doing in the weight room is transferring? I think focusing on power development, I really hope it's something that catches fire, and especially in the parent population, of not worrying about, how much weight I'm lifting, how fast I'm lifting it, not worrying about how far I can run, but how fast I can run. How do we focus on transfer? Joe, we'll start with you, just because you have the luxury of, you get to see them both playing and training.
Yeah. So that's obviously, I think it's the toughest question. That's like the biggest question of strength conditioning right now is obviously, how do we get things to transfer into their sport? It's different from age to age, obviously, but I think that's the big thing with the older athletes is it becomes more intricate with what we need to do to make it transfer. So like, for example, I saw a tweet from, I hope I'm saying his first name right, Jerry DiFilippo, right? I see a lot of his tweets about, and a guy named Justin Moore from Parabolic Strength. I don't know if you guys know him, but just looking at tiny details of a guy doing like a 45-degree drop step, and what do their hips look like? And I think that's kind of where the tide is changing in strength conditioning, is especially with those older, more advanced kids. We need to start looking at those little things where we can improve their movements and make them faster, smoother, more efficient. Now, the $1 million question is, okay, how do we do that? And I think everyone's going to go about that in a different way. And for me, obviously it's hard because I don't have those one-on-one assessments, but obviously we need to use the weight room as a tool to do that. And the way I see it is, I'm going to, quote Cal Dietz here, is the goal of our workout is to create a stress response. And I think that's not the end all be all, obviously, but I think part of the workout is to create that response that we need to get bigger, faster, stronger. And then the rest of it, I think, in my opinion, something I'm working on too, is we need to cater our accessories to improving that movement. Whether it's their scap, their shoulder blade, how it's moving, and whether it's, we need internal rotation here in a split squat so they can get it while they're pitching on the mound, stuff like that. And I think that's a tough question because there's so many things you could do, but I think looking at those minute details, and again with the older kids, is incredibly important to making it transfer on the field. Because Dan and I talked about this, where you can have these weight room warriors. It doesn't mean they're a good player, right? So bridging that gap between being a strength coach and working closely with the sport coaches and knowing what the sport entails, I think that's incredibly important, so we can understand the movements, what positions they need to get into. I think I'm kind of rambling here, but it's a tough question, I think. But focusing on those little things to improve the movements, I think, is the big part of it. And
I think that's what brings that, us as being the experts in that, and then the experience of like, hey, I've seen this with multiple athletes. Cody, I'm gonna kind of call you out. I feel like you've taken the easy way out, like improving somebody's vertical jump with your basketball players. Like it's a pretty clear and direct correlation. Have you seen that with the athletes you work with?
Yes, but also, so this summer I kind of changed my training with some of the older kids. Say I have a kid who was jumping 11.3, but we increased his vertical jump 2 inches, but he got to that. He's either jumping 11.3 consistently and faster, or he's consistently increasing. Say his best day he had 11.5. Now he's hitting 11.4, but just giving the feedback, I record a lot of the jumps that I have kids do. And then I'll show them, okay, here's what you looked like jumping. It could be 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, but here's how you jump today. and you can kind of see just the eye test. You got higher faster than you were a couple weeks ago, and even just seeing that, it gives you that mental aspect of like, okay, I feel better when I jump, I feel better when I play, and things that I couldn't do or used to be difficult are easier. So for me, who limited resources, so I can't test or I don't test med ball velocity, how do my baseball players feel when they play? How does their arm feel? Or softball players, how have they been hitting in terms of, when they make contact, are they hitting it harder? Are they hitting it further? Whatever it might be. So I kind of, like you said, like jumping is kind of a little bit easier for basketball players because all they care about is how high they can jump for the most part. But there's a lot more to it than just the simple, like, oh, I jump a little higher than I did 6 weeks ago. So there's a lot to, there's kind of like Joe said, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but there's a lot to this question. So, I mean, I'm sure we could talk all day about how to do this, how to give feedback, what kind of shows transfer outside of numbers themselves.
And I think you spoke to a piece that it isn't talked a ton, is just that mental side of, I see my numbers improve no matter what those numbers may be. And it gives that athlete the confidence to then attack that next obstacle or goal. And so if you can show them improvement in one moment and say, hey, here's the next thing to overcome, like maybe then that's valuable in itself. Like you might not get a ton of transfer from somebody's vertical jump to their throwing velocity, but just the fact that they improve that and they have the confidence of like, hey, like I worked hard, I saw improvement, I'm then going to apply that mentality to the next piece, the next focus. I think that's in itself is pretty valuable. Brandon, is that something you've seen with your athletes? Like, I mean, golf is such a, and I like keep poking on you about the golf piece, but I feel like golf is just such a mental game. Is that something you've seen with your golfers where like, hey, I put the work in, I improved my numbers in the gym, and now my golf game, I'm shaving strokes off my game. Have you seen that?
Yeah. So this is one reason where it really helps kind of having like a specific golf skill coach that I'm working with, that I'm partnered with, that again, my clients end up seeing him, they see me. Because he's got a K-vest. I don't have the luxury to have that, but say there's like certain things that we're trying to work on. Like he's identified that our client, they early extend within their swing and they have a tough time like sitting back, and especially when they are rotating, creating power, they end up getting a little bit too tall within that. So then there's things that I can end up doing within the gym. We can end up doing certain medicine ball throws. Like usually I'll start with some where you're facing the wall a little bit more. So you can end up getting your hip, a little bit more of a hip hinge as you end up getting into that back hip as you rotate. And then working on things like just your hip hinge pattern, working on your RDLs, deadlifts, everything like that. As long as we're working on these things and he can measure it with a K-vest, then we can actually see like objective numbers of, yes, he is kind of hanging back a little bit more where he's not early extending. He is kind of keeping his hips back where he's able to maintain that power in the lower body a little bit longer. Or things like, say we're working on someone's T-spine rotation and we're doing different exercises within the gym. They go see Travis, they get measured with the K-vest, and then they're able to see that, yes, you are getting a little bit more rotation in your backswing. So yeah, I definitely think that golf's a little bit easier. Basketball, football, those like sports that are a little bit more variable are kind of hard to see those differences. But it really helps having like a sport coach within that realm. I definitely think that where we can get a little bit more transfer training. I mean, the strength training, you're not bench pressing on the football field. You're not squatting on the ice rink and that kind of stuff when you're playing hockey. Obviously, we've already kind of talked about some of our medicine ball variations. Little things like, say, like we'll start with like the wall facing medicine ball scoop toss. Then we'll end up going towards where the wall's to our side. And then we can end up doing where we do a step back into a med ball throw. And so we can start building in some of these skills without necessarily putting a baseball in their hand. That'll help them develop like more power within throwing or whatever they're doing. Same thing within like when we're building like skills for like speed and agility. So obviously we want to start like with our global ones. We want to start with like acceleration, top end speed, backpedaling, shuffling, lateral run, and then working on like a hip flip to a hip flip to a crossover, and then a hip flip to a shuffle. So we always kind of build in within these general qualities, and then just knowing a sport and knowing how they move a little bit better, you can start turning some of these general movements into more specific things. Like you're setting up, I mean, cone drills. A lot of times if I'm working with a basketball player, I'll end up doing some things on the court specifically. So we'll put them in different situations as far as like, all right, we're going to work on a step back move. A lot of the times, like we don't have a ball in their hands, but it's putting them in certain situations that they know they're in within the game situation. And then just working on their like first step quickness within that, or change of direction within some of those movements. And then, I mean, if you want to get energy system specific, just again, knowing the sport, as long as there's someone that's a little bit more developed, you can start working on some of these things. You can start, as they get closer to their sport, you can start working on some of the specific energy systems that they're going to end up using, rather than like Joe was kind of talking about earlier. It's like, we're not going to have baseball athletes, we're not going to have them running long distance right before a season. I mean, granted, for a cardiovascular like point, like you're going to build the aerobic system up a little bit, but baseball is using a lot more of different energy systems than that. And so you can get a lot more specific within like your energy system training too, if you got the right athletes for it.
Yeah, I think that just that in itself encapsulates how difficult this question of transfer is. And I'll, Bill, I want you to finish it off. Where have you seen transfer from some of the training that you've been doing, and success, failure, whatever it may be?
What I like to do is a little bit different. I like to break down like just the kinematics of a swing or a throw, certain muscle groups that really are helping to accelerate that movement and are really working at high speeds, whereas there's other muscle groups that have to be a little bit more stiff and resist movement and maybe help decelerate that throwing action. So when doing that and breaking it down a little bit, you can start to see, okay, in a throw, for instance, I know that the pec is going to contract super fast. So at the end of the month, I'll test something like a medicine ball chest pass for distance or for velocity. And I know that the pec is getting more, basically getting better at doing its job. And then at the end of the month, I want to see if a guy's one-arm dumbbell row can improve, if they can improve their eccentric strength of the rear shoulder through maybe a manually resisted exercise, or even if it's just something as simple as putting on the crane scale and having a guy perform an external rotation with their shoulder against the crane scale. If that number improves, then we know that the shoulder is getting good at that stiffness job or that deceleration job. Just kind of working at it like that segment by segment helps me out a lot. And that's kind of what I like to do throughout the whole movement system when I'm training.
That was a portion of your book. I had some notes that I had taken from, I think, the on-base use screen and a couple other certs I did over quarantine. And I was kind of going through that same thought process of, okay, like, what are the joints involved? What are the muscles involved? Okay, what are our synergists? What are our antagonists? Like, what are our agonists? Like, what are those muscles? And then what are the ways that we can attack those? So your book really outlined that and made, you did all the hard work for me. So I appreciate the cheat sheet.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, no, I appreciate you guys' input, your time. I think there's a ton of great information, that we can provide to families and to parents and athletes and coaches, all the above. So just real quick, give us your tag, where we can find you on social, Facebook, whatever it may be. Bill, if you want to start with yours, and then we'll kind of make our way around the room.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Bill Miller Training. And you can find my book, Swing Fast, A Guide to Rotational Power, on Amazon. It's available in an ebook and a paperback copy.
Awesome. Highly recommend it. It's got a ton of great info, practical. I think that's the part that I appreciate the most of. It's like, hey, these are things we can actually do. So everyone just shuffled. So Brandon, go ahead and give us your tag where we can find you.
Yeah. So my Instagram handle is Brandon, and then the number 1 STL. So again, my last name's Firstel, little play on letters and words and that kind of stuff.
Nice. And then Cody, where we find you?
You can find me on Instagram at AIM Sports Performance.
Awesome. And then Joe?
You can find my gym on Instagram at GTS Gym. So G as in guy, I don't know, GTS Gym. And then same thing on Facebook, GTS Gym. And then on Instagram, my personal, I tweet a lot about kind of the training world. Joe Schiess, CS. And I'll warn people, I am straightforward about things. So as Dan knows.
No, I've appreciated your follow, Joe, because it gives me a little bit of freedom to tweet some of the stuff I joke that I probably have a ton of tweets that I could almost like write a book with that I'm going to tweet just because they don't belong on the internet. But
Oddly enough, so do I. So do I.
Joe finds the good middle ground. So I appreciate you guys' time. Thanks for hopping on. This is the Talking Points at the Training Center. We're going to be doing a much better job of getting more regular content out. Keep an eye out, and we're going to keep just trying to get as much good information, as many talking points as we can. Interact. We'll be on YouTube. We'll have the podcast up. If you have any questions for us or people that you'd like, or guests, or things that you'd like us to talk about, feel free, comment, DM. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DubBaseball, at ID3Training, and at Ozella Baseball. Thanks for joining us on the Talking Points podcast. Until next time, keep developing.